This is the CBS Evening News. Susan Spencer sitting in tonight for Connie Chung. Good evening. With his economic program jeopardized by strikes and ethnic unrest, Soviet leader Gorbachev did today what American leaders often do in times of crisis. He went on national television to plead for calm and cooperation. Barry Peterson reports from Moscow.
Mikhail Gorbachev showed up unannounced on national television this afternoon at a time when viewers were tuning in to watch cartoons. Sitting in a small office, his tired face was a testament to his own words. We've been working on this day and night. And in his comments, he made it clear that the miners' complaints mirror his own frustrations about how slowly things are changing in this country. Many of these problems should have been solved 2 or 3 years ago, he says. And here's the man who sowed the seeds of this country's miners' strike, Mikhail Gorbachev, speaking with Ukrainian miners during a visit last winter. Look around you, he said. Those who lag behind on the road to perestroika, no matter their position, you have to push them aside. Don't worry, Mikhail Sergeyevich, said this miner. We'll surmount any obstacle. Gorbachev aligning himself with the miners now is an indication he will use the strike as an excuse to purge the Communist Party, adopting the miners' complaints as his own bill of indictment against old-line party members standing in the way of his reforms. That would boost Gorbachev's programs and increase his hold on power. He could put more of his own people in control. The miners' strike is a sign of the growing resentment about the declining quality of life here. Gorbachev hopes to use that resentment to his favor, using it as a broom to sweep out all those who oppose his reforms from the local level to the very top of this government. Barry Peterson, CBS News, Moscow.
In the coal fields of the Ukraine, striking miners crowded around television sets to watch Gorbachev, but as Jan Charlton reports, the hundreds of thousands on strike show no sign of backing down.
The men from strike headquarters meant business. A shift had gone back to work at the Glubokaya coal mine, and they came here to find out why. We've been putting up with this for 70 years, he's arguing. If we don't stick it out now, we'll never be worth more than a plugged kopeck. In this country where labor unrest has been almost unknown since the 1920s, the word strikebreaker is not part of the language. But the men from strike headquarters clearly understood that any defectors from the strike meant their position would be weakened. At the mine, people not working below in the pits had little to do. The miners' major beef that the mines are unsafe has been admitted by Soviet mining officials. In the huge Ukraine and in Siberia, 600 men a year are killed by rockfalls, collapsing timbers, and gas explosions. Machinery, when it works, is primitive, and safety standards are grim. Miners accuse their strike bosses. You told us it was decided to go back to work. No, we didn't, said the managers. You wanted to.
These first-time strikers have quickly learned the politics of how to stand together, but they have yet to face a direct order from Moscow, and that is where they're likely to fall apart.
To keep that from happening, the strikers have sent a delegation to Moscow to meet with Gorbachev. He's promised their problems will be examined by the Supreme Soviet with the strikers' input. This afternoon, they watched him admit on national television they probably had reasons for their extreme stand. But in a country dependent on coal for electrical power, every day they stay out here means a strain somewhere else. In an economy already in danger of collapse, even legitimate demands of the few will not win a fight with the needs of the many. Jan Charlton, CBS News, Donetsk, the Ukraine.
Japan is reeling tonight amid projections that the party that has ruled the country for 3 decades has been trounced at the polls, losing control of the upper house. As Bill Whitaker reports, sex scandals and corruption appear finally to have caught up with the LDP.
It's like nothing Japan has ever seen before. After 34 years as the undisputed king of the political hill, Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP, is about to go down to defeat and lose control of the upper house of parliament.
The LDP, for the first time in its history, will lose the majority in upper house.
Voters are sick and tired of scandal and corruption, and a new 3% consumption tax is universally despised, especially by women.
Every time we do any shopping, we have to pay this tax. And so the housewives are very angry about this tax.
Opposition parties love the tax. The Japan Socialist Party has made tax repeal the centerpiece of its campaign and expects to ride the anti-ruling party wave to an unprecedented election victory. Socialist Party chief Takako Doi compares the tax revolt to the Boston Tea Party.
Boston Tea Party.
Defeat in these elections won't sever the LDP's grip on power, but will weaken it. And that could mean a divided, chaotic government and a tougher line toward the U.S. on trade issues. Socialists promise more protection for Japanese industry and agriculture. A weakened ruling party may be forced to go along to appease politically powerful farmers already angered by increases in American agricultural imports. In the last days of the campaign, the ruling party even trotted out scandal-plagued Prime Minister Sosuke Uno to say his party will consider modifying the hated tax. But even before the votes are counted, ruling party members are blaming Uno for the defeat and urging him to resign.
I'm sorry to say, I'm afraid that Mr. Uno failed.
But nothing, it seems, can save the LDP now. One voter said, maybe the party will learn from defeat and clean up its act. Bill Whitaker, CBS News, Tokyo.
Still ahead on the CBS Evening News, selling Congress on the high cost of stealth. And later on Inside Sunday, the high cost of health and the crisis over prices. The controversial B-2 stealth bomber is flying into the teeth of a Capitol Hill storm. The Bush administration is pushing hard for congressional approval of the program, claiming the B-2 is an indispensable element of U.S. arms control policy. Jacqueline Adams reports.
Now, the B-2.
Northrop, the bomber's manufacturer, hit the airwaves this weekend to win support for the most expensive airplane ever built. Congress this week will vote to kill or severely limit the stealth. And at $70 billion for the fleet President Bush has requested, sticker shock has left lawmakers agog.
We have to come down to the bare-knuckle facts in the Congress as to how we're going to pay for this thing. It's up to about $538 million a copy right now.
With only one 2-hour test flight under its wings, the stealth still faces inevitable and costly design changes, which make even supporters skittish about fully funding the new plane.
We've got to fly it in different conditions under a lot more stress than it flew under the other day.
At some point, it's going to have to be a go, no-go decision on the B-2. I hope it's not this year.
The administration is playing hardball. They argue the plane is cheaper than any of the alternatives and would throw arms control talks in chaos if it were canceled.
We structured our entire START strategy around the notion that we wanted to de-emphasize fast-flying intercontinental ballistic missiles and instead emphasize the manned bomber.
But critics claim that's arms control blackmail.
And the last protection of it is a political argument, sort of the ultimate refuge of scoundrels, if you will, that if we don't get this aircraft, we'll take our marbles and go home from the arms control talks. This is basically the military arguing it to protect that program.
The president intends to lobby hard for the stealth this week, but with other major expenditures facing Congress, like the S&L bailout, the cleanup of the nuclear weapons plants, and the war on drugs, saving stealth could be an uphill battle. Susan?
Jackie Adams, thank you. A suspended top Foreign Service officer who was once the #2 U.S. diplomat in Austria is still incommunicado today, but there is growing speculation about the scope and duration of his suspected espionage activities. Ron Allen reports.
The whereabouts of State Department official Felix Bloch remain a mystery today. No signs of surveillance outside his home, while the FBI continues investigating the possibility that Bloch may have been a spy for the Soviets for the past decade or longer. Administration officials have had nothing to say since the former senior U.S. diplomat was suspended from his State Department post last week.
It's an intelligence matter, and we never comment on intelligence matters.
U.S. lawmakers expect a briefing tomorrow.
It's not good from what I've read anyway. Doesn't look good at all.
Bloch joins a long list of recent suspected and convicted spies for the Soviets, including John Walker, the Navy spy who gave communications information to the Soviets, Edward Lee Howard, the CIA spy who identified agents inside the Soviet Union, Marine Sergeant Clayton Lonetree, who allowed Soviet agents access to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, and Ronald Pelton, a National Security Agency employee who gave the Soviets details about U.S. intelligence gathering methods.
It seems about every year now we get a new major spy case. For a long time after World War II, we were having most of our espionage cases brought about by people who were philosophically aligned to communism or to Marxism. Today, it's usually for profit.
At this point, Bloch's possible motivation remains unclear. He could be the first State Department official charged with espionage in nearly 30 years. Ron Allen, CBS News, the State Department.
Missing sections of the DC-10 that crashed in Sioux City, Iowa last week, now combing an area some 60 miles away. Meanwhile, as Mark Phillips reports, the town today remembered those who died.
They gathered in the churches of Sioux City today to reflect on the tragedy that had fallen out of the sky around them and to wonder what it meant.
Let us be more aware of how precious life is and how precious one another is. That is a priceless good that can come out of this tragedy.
Many survivors agreed.
I certainly don't want to waste this opportunity of a new life. I want to really use it.
For the investigators, the task remains to find out why the tail engine exploded, blowing holes through the stabilizing wings and cutting vital hydraulic control lines. They have increased search efforts using aircraft with infrared cameras in an area about 60 miles from the crash site, 37,000 feet below where the engine explosion took place.
It is very important for the furtherance of this investigation for us to recover these parts.
Investigators here have been fortunate in having virtually the entire airplane and a surviving flight crew to provide information. But without the missing fan assembly of the suspect number 2 engine, determining just why that engine blew up and apparently caused this crash will be that much more difficult. Some of the missing parts had been in service for a long time, for more than 90% of their design life.
If it's determined that a certain part failed due to fatigue, that could be a reason to reevaluate something like that.
Since the crash, United has been inspecting the engines of its DC-10 fleet, but have said they found nothing unusual.
We are looking at each of these engines with a visual inspection, and we felt that to be a prudent course of action.
There are still 35 survivors hospitalized here, 8 in critical condition. Most of those who could leave have gone. The dead, too, are finally making their way home. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Sioux City.
An American Airlines Airbus ran into heavy turbulence on a flight from San Juan, Puerto Rico to Miami. 41 passengers and 4 flight attendants were injured as they were tossed around the cabin. They were treated in Miami early this morning for sprains, bumps, and bruises. A spectacular day for American athletes abroad. Mark Calcavecchia won golf's oldest championship, the British Open, in a 4-hole playoff with 2 other golfers. And in Paris, a dramatic come-from-way-behind victory for cyclist Greg LeMond in the Tour de France. LeMond, a California resident, won his 2nd tour, this one by only 8 seconds, the closest finish ever. America's national pastime honored 2 superstars today as Cincinnati's Johnny Bench and Boston's Carl Yastrzemski were inducted into baseball's Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. Both were elected in their very first year of eligibility. Also inducted Cardinal great Red Schoendienst and umpire Al Barlick. The chairman of the House Committee on Aging is proposing an overhaul of the U.S. healthcare system. Edward Roybal will introduce legislation tomorrow to provide medical coverage to all Americans and at the same time limit government spending on health care. The United States has by far the most expensive healthcare system in the world. Yet ironically, millions of Americans have no coverage. Tonight on Inside Sunday, healthcare, the problem and some solutions. We begin in Oregon, where a revolutionary and controversial new program is about to go into effect. In the last days of his life, 7-year-old Kobe Howard's family pleaded for money for the bone marrow transplant he desperately needed. The state of Oregon had said no Medicaid funds. Kobe Howard died. His death shocked the country and prompted Oregon to re-examine its health care spending. A bill to be signed into law this week extends medical coverage to everyone, but does so by rationing the services the state will pay for.
If, in fact, this country is not willing to spend half of every dollar on health care, which we aren't willing to and clearly can't do, we're going to have to make some judgments to stretch those dollars as far as we can.
A new commission will make those judgments. Daniel Pickard's broken toe likely would be paid for as basic health care, but services beyond basic will be ranked according to their perceived benefit to society, and lower-ranked treatments may not be funded. Prenatal care, for example, would be a high priority, in part because it's so cost-effective.
Just the cost of care to a sick newborn is just, it's unconscionable when we can prevent that.
Need a pair of 7 rounds. But expensive or risky procedures might not be funded. Ironically, that likely would include transplants.
We all want the kind of treatment we want, when we want it. We want the doctor we choose, when we choose it. We're not going to have those choices in the future.
Supporters say this new system will guarantee that people won't have to be dropped from Medicaid. Opponents call it blatantly unfair.
There's no way we can say someone should be denied life-giving care while someone else gets it simply because they make more money.
This program is being viewed as ethically acceptable because it's politically feasible. The group that it affects, the poor, is one that simply doesn't have the clout to represent its own interests.
The plan has sold politically. Organized Medicine supports it, and last week state officials lobbied Washington for permission to start. In a country where 1 in 5 citizens is uninsured, Oregon's experiment is being watched very closely.
If we're going to get good care, then we're going to have to place many limits and constraints on ourselves. I think that's inevitable, but I don't think we'll necessarily be all the worst off for doing so.
Private industry also is wrestling with rising health care costs. CBS News reporter Linda Tyra tells us now how one company managed to get those costs under control.
Allied Signal has taken the plunge, tired of watching its profits eaten up by dramatic increases in employee health care costs, increases as much as 39% in one recent year. Allied Signal decided to sign an innovative 3-year managed health care plan. The idea, know in advance how much health care would cost in hopes of saving hundreds of millions of dollars.
Not that we're going to reduce our costs, but if we can control the escalation in the rate of increase each year, then we think we've made a major step forward.
Such efforts have caught the eye of a congressional commission looking for answers to the nation's health care crisis.
If employers are put in the position of having to pay an ever-increasing share of the country's health care costs, then our capacity to compete internationally is going to be reduced.
Under Allied Signal's new plan, employees are covered by a network of doctors picked by the Cigna insurance company. But unlike many such plans, workers can also see their own doctors, though their costs will be higher. While Allied Signal says that so far 75% of those covered are using the insurance company's doctors most of the time, employees give the plan mixed reviews.
I went in for a physical, and they did everything, and all it cost me was $10. So that was good.
Well, the old system was easier to get appointment, and there wasn't much paperwork as there is now.
Yes, it does involve change, and yes, some employees get upset with it, but it does ensure quality of medicine and impacting or lowering cost.
If it's been a gamble for Allied Signal to take a new health care approach, it's also been a major test for the insurance company. Cigna knows that if this plan succeeds, many other companies may follow.
I think the trend in the United States is going to be more towards the managed healthcare environment. In fact, I would say that within 5 years, 90% of the employees in the United States will be in managed healthcare networks.
While no one thinks the Allied Signal plan is a complete answer to soaring health insurance costs, at the very least, it promises to relieve the squeeze on the company's bottom line. Linda Tyra, CBS News, Washington.
One more plan aimed at attacking rising health care costs already is making its way through Congress. The aim of this one is to control Medicare costs by putting an annual cap on Medicare payments to doctors. Leading the opposition, the American Medical Association. The Sandinista regime of Nicaragua has been busily marking its 1979 victory over General Somoza. The leftist government is promising a democratic future, but unless the economy improves, there may be no future at all. Doug Tennell reports.
10 years after their revolution, the Sandinistas and the U.S. government appear to agree on what must happen next in Nicaragua. President Daniel Ortega told crowds celebrating the revolution's 10th anniversary this week he wants a free, open, and clean campaign leading up to February's Nicaraguan elections. It may be just another campaign promise, but Washington is sending a clear warning to Ortega not to break it.
If the government of Nicaragua does not keep its commitments to hold a free and fair election, to allow observers to attend, to set up a fair process, a level playing field, there will be consequences.
Those consequences are likely to be seen here first, in the jungle camps along Nicaragua's border with Honduras, where the Contras await their next orders. While Washington curtails financial aid to their political directorate in Miami, the U.S. government continues to provide so-called non-lethal aid to some 10,000 fighters here. They may be page 2 news right now, but the threat of renewed war is still uppermost in the minds of the Sandinistas.
Right now, we have to tackle the issue of achieving a definitive peace, because unless we have peace, we're not going to be able to recover economically.
The most potentially disruptive force in Nicaragua today is hunger, a staggering inflation rate of 36,000%, sliced into an average family's ability to feed itself last year. It turned poor neighborhoods into desperate ones, where people are speaking out now more than ever before. Life was easier before the revolution, she says. There is no milk for the children. And before the revolution, there was at least some private help.
That nation's just coming undone. And the only way, I think, that they are going to get back on their feet is to open up, to start getting credits and assistance from the West. And they're not going to get that if they're seen as a little petty dictatorship being run by a couple of brothers.
The State Department has already accused the Sandinistas of harassing their political opponents. But Daniel Ortega toned down his anti-American rhetoric this week to tell his people and Washington just what they wanted to hear. Doug Tennell, CBS News, Managua.
That is the CBS Evening News. I'm Susan Spencer in New York. Have a good evening.
This is CBS.